We'll, we'll start off. First of all, my name is Eamonn Carolan, and I have here with me Daphne Shackleton. And I suppose my history with this place here is this is where my parents, this is where my father was born, Paddy Carolan, and my grandfather and grandmother would have owned this place here. And we're hugely thankful to the Clark family for allowing us in here this afternoon. The house was originally the bank house on a fair day. There was every fair day the Hibernian Bank came here, and it was also the post office for the town. So you had when you went in the front door there, you had the post office on the left. No, post office on the left, yes, and the bank on the right when you went through the front door of the house. And this lovely sheds here and whatever, this where Shirley is here on the left hand side, that was the coach house. The coaches would come in that archway and they'd be parked into this coach house here. So we're thankful to the Clark family for allowing us in here, but it's my pleasure to welcome my neighbour from Lakeview in Mullagh, Daphne Shackleton. And Daphne is here to speak generally about a diary that she has inherited in the house, and that diary is prepared or written by a Hariette Barnes Mortimor, and it covers a period of approximately 7 years from 1871 to 1878. Welcome, Daphne.
Thank you very much.
And I think you're going to give us a bit of an introduction, a background to who Hariette Barnes Mortimor was and how she came to Mullagh.
Before I get into the detail of some of the entries of the diary, which I have extracted because I thought they might be interesting for people from Mullagh and Moynalty in particular, I'd like to just say a little general word about Hariette Barnes. She was, of course, born in Westland, Moynalty, the daughter of Thomas Barnes and Jane Kellett, two long-established families from Moynalty, dating from 1600. In 1871, after what could be called a whirlwind courtship, because she only knew or was being courted by David Mortimor for 6 months, she married David Mortimor in 1872. She started to keep a diary in 1871, on the 1st of January 1871, and in that diary she recorded the weather, the letters she received every day, the letters she sent every day, and her busy activities, the activities of her busy life. Hers, of course, was a relatively privileged life. She was from the big house, and she married into another big house. Her friends and all her associates were from the Protestant community mainly. The rectors and their families, the doctor and his family, the banker's wife in Virginia, the mill owner, and some of the larger families. She and David had no children, and so she was very fortunate in that she had a very loyal staff, and she was very good to these staff, I believe, and she actually involved them in a lot of her daily activities, bringing them on her travels and bringing them backwards and forwards to Kells, to Dublin, to Balbriggan, and to places where they were originally from.
I know, going through the initial part of the diary, which you sort of separated into the courtship initially,
yes,
when Hariette was living in Moynalty, she refers to David Mortimor as Mr. M, and it's Mr. M and M for quite a while,
yes,
until all of a sudden one fateful day he becomes David.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Mr. M, D-A-M, and then and then David.
David,
yes. And I'll talk a bit more about her relationship, if you like, with him, because she was actually quite a liberated woman, I do believe. She was very friendly with Alice Stopford, who I don't know you know from
yes,
Kells, who was very much a historian and a social activist, a Republican, involved with the Howth gun running, and she has accounts of her friendship with Alice before Alice got married and went to London in 1874. She stood up to her husband, and I'll say a few things about that when she writes in her diary. She stood up to the men in the church she used to go to when they were in Liverpool, where they went frequently. They insist there was a men's side and a woman's side, and on one occasion she records not been allowed to sit on the men's side of the church because the church was full. She tried 3 times. The service, and she was put back and told she couldn't sit there. When the service commenced, she sat on the men's side.
Very good.
So I think that was quite good.
I see another lady coming in here into the thing, and I remember when she came down to Mullagh first, and she's looking around. When she came down to Mullagh first, again in the Catholic Church, it was of course ladies on the left-hand side, you'd remember, Margaret, and men strictly on the right-hand side.
Even then?
Even
Yes.
back until the 1990s, and a young lady from Dublin came down and decided to upset that one as well.
And on another occasion, on a sunny day in Liverpool again,
Yes.
she was highly indignant to be told she wasn't allowed to sit on the grass on a lovely sunny day.
That would be unbecoming of a young lady,
I
presume.
guess. I guess. I have to say, didn't seem to be very sensitive to the poor living conditions of some of her neighbours around about. Neither was she very politically involved because she rarely mentioned politics, although she does, and I'll read the quotation, she does mention driving on a trap through Mullagh on the day that Mr. Bigger and Mr. Fay were campaigning for Home Rule, and she called it haranguing the people. And I'll read the diary about that afterwards. However, she did campaign for the women's vote long before that was a popular movement, and she was canvassing among her friends and in Kells, and there was a book in Henderson's in Kells where you went to sign if you were in favour of the women's vote. So that's something we must research, maybe, Paul, if we can find out what that was done.
I should say, Daphne, that at this stage of this diary, you've transcribed the diary and you're sort of beginning to work through it and trying to identify the points of interest and the points of historical significance.
Yes.
I know it's a normal life, it's a local life, but
it's very local.
But she lived through times that were very interesting.
Absolutely,
absolutely. And the changes in the historical changes at those times were pretty significant.
Yes.
There were about to be a huge change in
but she rarely mentioned anything of that. She must have been felt quite secure.
Yes.
You know, because I'll mention a few issues where there was trouble. I mean, the poor old rector in I didn't actually make the rector in the Glebe got an awful fright when some men came to the door and insisted he came down, and he didn't, and I think he might have had some sort of a turn because he left very shortly afterwards.
Yes.
So I think there probably was a certain amount of uncertainty.
Yes.
Anyway, we might read through some of this that relate to the area around here.
Yes.
But I should say it's actually a very sad diary, because despite all the activities she had, all the privilege she had, all the travel, everything, she contracted TB, and within 8 weeks she was dead. She went to Hastings in the south of England when she was very, very ill in the effort to get the air which they thought might have cured it, but sadly she didn't survive. She came back here to Lakeview, and she died 5 days later after leaving Hastings. And thanks to 2 people who are here today, after a long search, I found her grave only this week, thanks to John O'Brien and Paul McCabe. I'd relied too much on online information, too much on the list that's in the church in Moynalty where she's buried, and of course local knowledge is best, especially generous local knowledge like these 2 people here.
I've seen the picture of the headstone that you found.
Yes.
You found only this week.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful inscription on it, and a very clear inscription on the headstone.
Yes.
It must have been a wonderful
find.
I was
very moved to find it, and especially that Paul and John and I think Andrew Clinton cleared the briars, so there is now a pathway down to the grave in amongst the goats, and who are clearing the graveyard at the moment.
And these goats being paid to clear the graveyard.
Yeah. So will I mention a few of the...
Yes, we go to the diary entries, yes.
She started her diary in 1871 with the death of her father, and I'm going to read that out. She was 29 when he died. Her mother had died 13 years previously. Papa, on the 7th of January 1871, Papa was ill, and Dr. Halton had to be sent for, as Dr. Ringward was not around. 4 days later, Papa had a pain, and Dr. Halton was sent for. Another 10 days or so on, William, her brother, quite a lot could be said about William. He was an exceptional person, William Barnes, had to go to Lochalee Mountains to meet Mr. Batt, who he is, I don't know, and afterwards to Kingscourt. Zai and I accompanied him and found it very cold. It was a very cold January in 1871. They were ice skating, and it was very cold. And
I've seen the references to ice skating, Daphne.
Yes.
I know it's the silly things that are going to catch my attention, excuse me.
Yes.
But they were ice skating on Mullagh Lake.
They were.
And they also they ice skated on I can't remember the other lake.
Yes, I think it's a pond, and I wanted, somebody local may know,
Yes.
Ringford Pond.
Yes.
There's several mentions to Ringford Pond. They were skating. I think it may have been within Westland or very close to Westland, but they were skating around the time of her father dying.
And I think
the other thing, around the time of her father dying, a few days before he died, the family went for a walk through Oakley Park Farm. Thomas Barnes, Hariette's father, had, on a marriage settlement, had leased 200 acres from Oakley Park, the Bomfords. So I suspect they were walking it for the last time. They must have known he was about to die.
Yes.
February the 22nd, Papa was better. The 23rd, Dr. Kellett and Dr. Ringworth were here. The latter slept here, as Papa was much worse and never ceased moaning. It's interesting, the next day, Dr. Kellett was again here in the morning, and Dr. Ringwood went away after breakfast, not intending to come till the evening. But a little after 11, Papa's breathing got so bad that the doctor had to be sent for again. He did all he could, but it was no use. Both windows were open to assist his breathing, but about 2:00 p.m. he died, smothered by phlegm upon his chest. Papa was buried 4 days later. A very large funeral. She did not go to the funeral. I think that was women probably didn't go then. So then we have an account in her diary of her life after the death of her father, and visiting, for example, Alice Stopford, where she went numerous times in the April-May of 1871.
She describes herself as going to read with her.
Yes.
At the time.
Yes.
It's interesting.
It is. She came on May the 17th. She went to Alice Stopford and read a chapter of Hume to her. Hume was a philosopher, a very popular philosopher
Yes.
at that particular time.
Wow.
And then the rest of the summer, before she really got involved with David Mortimer, there were picnics. We took tea at Crewstown Churchyard, I Road. We called for Mary. That was Mary Main, I think. We had great trouble lighting the fire and tying the horses. They set the box of matches on fire, and Weasel snatched one of her reins as I was tying her to a bush. Notwithstanding all these mishaps, we enjoyed it very much.
I think the horses played a very, very big part in
Absolutely.
her life.
Absolutely.
I think I was talking to Sean Quinn, Sean here, about the horses, and he would remember the horses in the Barnes time. I think, Sean, you were just opposite.
Very.
And I think that the last lady I remember, and I'm sure you remember, Sean, was Ruby Marshall Barnes. She
Yes.
was the last, and she was a really good friend of June Mortimer,
absolutely.
Yes.
Ruby was a great niece of Harriet, who we're talking about.
Yes.
June Mortimer was a great niece of David Mortimer, who she married. And Ruby and June Mortimer remained extremely good friends.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for their life.
Could I read one here, Daphne, from
Yes.
1872? It's a reference to Mullagh in it as well. I think it was there was no church, as Dr. Dundas could get nobody to do duty for him. Black Charlie's leg, and this is a bit gory, had to be cut off last evening about 7 p.m. He and his brother Matt were driving home on their outside car from Castleran, which is down near Ballygilstuff, where they went to Mr. Welsh's funeral. The night was very dark and windy, and they drove against an ass's cart, which was standing in the road. The footboard on the side Charlie was knocked off, and his leg dreadfully shattered. It was a little beyond the chapel at Mullagh, which is probably down at the Heritage Centre, that it happened, and his brother brought him to the dispensary in Moynalty. Dr. Ringwood again sent for Dr. Halton. They must have worked in tandem all of the time.
Yes.
And this morning they brought him home, and the poor man then passed away, I think, a few days later. There was quite a number of accidents recorded in this diary.
Well, horses were dangerous, I suppose.
Yes.
You know, accidents happened through horses.
Being thrown from a
Yes.
horse.
There was also murders, and I'll mention one murder. In October 1871, she describes her sister and her cousins drove to see the house where Edward Bryan was murdered on Sunday. We saw his sister-in-law and niece, the latter of whom had been reading to him when the shot was fired. And I checked this out, and there's a reference to it in the Dundalk Democrat, which says, and in summary, about 6 p.m. on Sunday the 28th of October, Edward Bryan, a farmer of about 60 years, married with no children, was sitting on a stool with his back to the window. His niece was sitting at a table nearby, reading a newspaper to her uncle, when 6 shots from a pistol or blunderbuss were discharged through the window, killing Edward Bryan instantly. The niece, having waited 10 minutes for the perpetrator to leave the scene, got the message conveyed to the police at Moynalty. Within an hour of their arrival, Peter Bryan, a nephew who lived in a miserable hovel at the corner of the farm, was arrested. That was at Carrickspringen, a few kilometres, as you know, from Moynalty on the King's Court Road.
Yes.
So that was October the 28th.
Yes.
So accidents and murders.
And I think that the geography, what I was fascinated by was the lengths that they would ride on horseback, and the geography, and mentioning all of the local places that they visited.
Yes, well, she was particularly involved with hunting.
Yes.
And they would go to meets as far away as Allenwood and Tankardstown. A lot of and they had their grooms, who I would like to talk more about, the local people who helped them on the farm, and
yes.
But maybe we should mention the courtship with
yes.
David Mortimor.
Yes.
As you say, it was a very quick courtship. And they really, she started talking about him in the October of 1871, and they were married in Dublin in St. George's Church on the 16th of May 1872.
Yes.
A month before, she had been to watch one of the Hedford family being married. On the April the 4th in 1872, Colonel Clayton and Lady Isabella Taylor's wedding took place in Kells Church. Cissy, her sister, and I went to see the wedding. We sat in the Hurdlestown pew. The church and streets were very prettily decorated with arches. Her cousin and her brother went to the wedding breakfast. So then a month later, she was in Dublin getting ready for her wedding in St. George's Church. She went and stayed in St. Stephen's Green, where her uncle lived, and the family were all gathered there. And she went out in the morning with David and his brother, who bought lockets for the bridesmaids and bouquets. And she wrote a lot of letters the day she got married, to her mother-in-law and to her sister-in-law. I don't know what that was all about, but she did. And then she was married in St. George's Church, and she lists who her bridesmaids were. And they crossed that evening to Holyhead and on to Paris for their honeymoon. And on her wedding day, she writes a special note, "I did not believe in earthly happiness before." So she was thrilled with her marriage. And they spent their marriage, as I say, in London and then in Paris. And on the first day of her honeymoon, she writes a special note, "I insisted on having my own way." So I think she must have been quite a strong lady.
She must have been quite a strong lady. We could write another chapter.
And then on the it's rather amusing.
Might be fiction.
It's rather amusing. On the last day of her honeymoon, when they were leaving Paris, she writes, "We got up a great deal too early for the early train in consequence of David's folly. He would not give me time to dress myself properly or to eat my breakfast. We had to walk for an hour in Euston, pour passer le temps, waiting, on account of him obviously fussing around and trying to get there in time."
Yes.
And they arrived in Holyhead then 2 o'clock, went to Kingstown where they had a bath, and then in the bath, poor David scalded himself. I was quite pale and faint from the bad effects for an hour and a half afterwards.
Poor man. And this was a public bath, I presume, in Kingstown. I don't know. I presume so.
Maybe they stayed. They went to England a lot, because I should have said that David Mortimor was a cattle dealer and a horse dealer, and they had a farm which they rented in Galway, where he went to buy cattle. The cattle were then shipped to Liverpool. And he also used a house in Liverpool, so they were constantly going to Galway. He was constantly going to fairs in Clifton, Moyard, Spiddle, yes. A lot of places down there, buying sheep, sending them on to Liverpool, and then he would be going to the markets in Liverpool, in Chester, Manchester, and a few other places he mentions.
He travelled a lot.
Yes. And the most wonderful thing was that they could leave in leave Lakeview. Finnegan, the groom, would leave them down to Virginia Road Station. They'd get the train to Kells, then they'd get the train from Kells to Drogheda, and then on the steam packet on to Liverpool, and they'd be there at 6 a.m. the next morning. And so he'd do his business, and they would actually sometimes even leave that very second night and be back at yes. Lakeview the next day, being met by their wonderful helper, Finnegan.
Yes, yes.
I think it might be interesting to mention the names, because they may ring bells with people. Certainly Finnegan was a groom who looked after the horses, and he met them at the railway stations and all the rest. And he went with them to England when they were hunting, for example. There was also another person who worked on the farm and to do with the horses, called James Brogan, and sadly he came to a bad end. And she writes on October the 9th, and this is 1874, David and I were in Galway, and when they arrived at home, we heard that James Brogan was to be buried in the evening, and he was very loyal. He's mentioned a lot in the diaries. He was killed on Wednesday, 2 days before, a few hours after I had gone, by a young horse which he had mounted for the first time in the yard. It reared and fell back. His head came against a stone, and he never spoke or appeared conscious afterwards, but died in the horse harness room. And then 2 days later, she went to see his widow, Anne Brogan. Now, I am told that there are Brogans who are on the way into Virginia, which may be that family. Yes. So if any of you, come and tell me afterwards if you want. They had a very loyal, a wonderful housekeeper called Anne Cahill. Now, I don't think she's any relation to the Cahills here, yes, because she seems to have been from Hariette's cousin's house between here and Mullingar, and she came with her on many of the events that she went to.
I was also taken somewhat by the distances that Hariette herself would walk.
Yes.
On occasion. You
yes.
mentioned that she would head off at all hours in the morning,
yep,
and walk for...
There's certainly an account of her leaving at 11:15 at night, arriving at her cousin's place near Clohan, between here and Mullingar, having a rest, breakfast, and then walking on again to Mullingar to get the train down to Galway. Yes. And the trains were so reliable. There's rarely an account of a train yes. ever being late, or less reliable were some of the groom who went to Kells instead of Virginia Road Station. Yes. No, he went to Virginia Road Station instead of Kells, so they had to walk all the way home. Yes. There was another Kellett who seemed to work on the farm, and that's rather amusing, I think. Dr. Dundas had been to see Anne Cahill, who was ill in bed with a bad cold, but she had to send for Dr. Halton, because James Kellett was taken suddenly violently ill on his wedding day. He was sufficiently recovered in the afternoon to lead the bride to the altar. So, so you'd wonder what
was going on with these men.
Well, that is a point.
But it's sprinkled with all kinds of locations around the area. I mean, I'm
yes.
looking at September the 27th here. 1873, we went to gather blackberries at the bridge between Mullagh and Moynalty, which of course is the bridge 2 miles out the road. We got 16.5 pounds and made jam and jelly. Amy and Emily rode to the Pattons to return their visit.
Wherever the Pattons are, I don't know.
But it's also
she talks about Horse Bridge.
Yes.
Does anybody know, is that bridge between Moynalty and Mullagh called Horse Bridge? Or maybe it's Gorse Bridge. Sometimes her writing isn't that clear.
Yes.
But anyway.
Yes. And that the one you mentioned previously in 1874, which was February the 8th, drove to Westland with Piper,
the horse,
who was in great spirits. A&M Cahill, who we've heard before, went to Donover, which Donover, of course, was the house next to Barnes's on the bridge there.
Owned by the Barnes family.
Owned by the Barneses at the bridge in Moynalty. And this is the bit you mentioned earlier. Bigger and Fay, the Home Ruler candidates, were haranguing the people from the top of the porch of N. Cahill's house in Mullagh as we were passing. They had a band of green flags flying. So we have tried to look around to see where N. Cahill's porch was in Mullagh. We have yet to find it, and we're still looking,
yes,
so we don't know where it was.
So anyway,
it's the top of the porch as well is an interesting description. So the village is fairly uniform, so we're not 100% sure where that is. But
there's no other mention of that except she does say, I think it was maybe a week or 10 days later, she said the Cavan elections took place, but no indication of the result, and that's another rabbit hole I can go down and just see what happened.
Yes. Yeah. So there is other it's a whole geography thing here where the hunts would go, and there's a description of a hunt following a fox from the Glen to Billywood, through Leitrim to Kill opposite Rantavan. Then we went up on Mullagh Hill, and then to Shancarnan, and to the Glen again. The Glen, I think, was in Moynalty country.
The Glen is in Cherrymount.
In Cherrymount. Where they got another. Came home then as Weasel got out, and Lord Headford broke his collarbone. There's an awful lot of accidents here. His horse having thrown him back by buck jumping when he first mounted them.
Yes.
So.
There's another one which mentions an accident with horses in Moynalty.
Yes. There's one here from Moynalty as well. Again, it's a sort of a geography one. There were races we went to at the Hill of Belair, Belair would be, I suppose, beside the football pitch or somewhere near the football pitch in Moynalty, to see. There was a good gathering there. 25 gentlemen in red coats started. They went around a flag up in Biggenfield at Newtown, which I think is towards Carlinstown, and came back in the evening post at Belair. The course was 4.5 miles. Some got falls. There we go again. Messrs W. Waller and G. Radcliffe amongst the numbers. Mr. Roberts came first and Mr. Carney second. And then it goes on to say there was also a farmer's race afterwards. No word who won that one. But Mrs. Garnett came on the car, which I presume was a pony and trap car rather than a car, with us on Davis Road. We walked about most of the time with Dr. Ringwood, Mr. Keating, that would be Keating's of Cabra, and Henry, Mr. Garnett. David and I walked home across Crockawella, and David went in the train. Crockawella being the field opposite the Barnes' house with the little graveyard, the little railing.
Where her ancestors
Yes,
where her ancestors were. I think it's just with a little railing around you. You can see it as you go across the bridge in on the left hand side.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's another account of another hunting accident in 1875, March the 18th. They were riding to a hunt at Williamstown. The colt threw me at the chapel in Moynalty by kicking when I was settling my habit, and of course she would have been riding side saddle. Mr. Harmon, who was with them, jumped down to catch the horse, but his own mare, as he pulled her back, came down on his foot and hurt him so greatly that he could not hunt. Anne Garahan brought him into, I think it's Ginty's, and gave him brandy. So that was in Moynalty village in 1875.
Yes.
And then she continued on about her hunting.
And then there's other episodes of fishing. I'm looking at one here in 1877 to remind us of today. Wet most of the day. Went with David to fish in Longfield in the evening.
Yeah, that's Longfield Bridge.
Yes.
Between here and Virginia.
It's where St. Killian's Well is.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And my much loved neighbour, Christy Hetherington, I went to see him and I asked him, and he said, oh yes, that was before they dredged that river at Longfield Bridge. It was a very good little trout stream.
Yes.
And they do refer the Mortimors to going down there to fish
Absolutely.
for trout.
On the following day, David caught 4 trout.
Oh, very nice.
In that river.
Yes. Just a little bit about her social life. Apart from the hunting, the other great activity was croquet, and a lot of the biggish houses around had croquet lawns,
including Lakeview.
Including Lakeview, yes. And she talks about in 1873, I think. Actually, this was before she was married. She went to the glebe at the rectory at Mullagh for at 3 o'clock for a croquet party. We rode over the lake and played on the Mortimors' croquet ground. The bride, Mrs. Adams, and her husband, Mrs. and Mrs. and Mr. John Preston, Mr. and Miss Mortimor were there, Mr. Moore, Miss Lizzie Taylor, and the Martin children were at it. And it must have been dodgy because the weather was very bad that night. There was thunder and lightning, but nevertheless, Mrs. Taylor's sister and the children came the next day to eat gooseberries.
There you go.
It's the local detail that
it is.
You'd
fascinating for local
sort of
people,
wonder.
the addresses and that.
Yeah.
And I was taken by the houses, the visiting Rathburns, for instance, out at the
Yes.
Lynn Road here.
Yes.
And Keating's is of course mentioned, and
Yes.
Oakley Park where the Bomfords were.
Yes.
And it's almost a geography lesson as to her
Her
social
whole
circle.
social circle.
Social circle.
I mean,
yes.
there's reference to a party they had at Lakeview in 1873 in November. She went up on the 13th of November. The both of them went up to Dublin because there was a sale of horses in Sewells. And when they were in Dublin, they brought a dinner and dessert service first. Then she and her cousins went with me to choose a piano, which they bought at Mackintosh's in Dublin. The next day she wrote invitations for a dance, next Thursday it was going to be. 2 days later, with her invitations in her hand, I imagine, she did a round of visits to Cabra, the Crawfords at Mayprath, Wilmount, which was the Radcliffes, the Ringwoods, Oakley Park, the Bonfords, and Westland and Donover.
Yes.
The same day the piano arrived, and I got the things moved out of my room for the supper. And then on the 20th, the dance took place. There were 14 gentlemen and 19 ladies. The company were
good numbers.
Mrs. in the small rooms and the piano for the music.
And this is in your house.
In our house.
Yes.
The company were Mrs. McNamara, Dudgeon, the Rathburns, the Shovellers, Goodison, Featherston, Caroline Dundas, George Dundas, Captain and Mrs. Clark, William and Eliza Reynolds, her cousins, Mr. and Mrs. Keatings and Constance Keating, the 2 Miss Radcliffes, Mr. and Mrs. Perkins, and Mr. Luby, Miss and Mr. William Radcliffe, the 3 Miss Bonfords, Dr. and Miss Ringward, Miss Harmon, and the latter slept there. Some of the people were very late in arriving on account of a Freemasons meeting in Kells, but they enjoyed themselves well, and we did not stop dancing till 6 a.m. And the supper looked beautiful. And it's kind of amusing. They didn't ask a Mr. Pentland because he had been to a dance at Cabra the week before, and at that dance Mr. Pentland proposed for Caroline Dundas and had to be sent home after supper.
Oh.
So we're probably running out of time.
I think so. I think she developed an illness.
This is the sad thing.
Towards the end of her diary, it becomes
more sporadic, the diary. And you know, she was very, very healthy. In the 8 years, she herself was never sick. And she survived the outbreaks of smallpox, which there was in the area in 1871, 1872. And during this outbreaks of smallpox, Dr. Robert Main died. He was of Moynalty. And Caroline Dundas, the mother of some children from the glebe in Moynalty. And immediately after those 2 deaths had happened, she and her whole family got vaccinated. There had been a vaccination program about 10 years previously, which I think a lot of people had not. I'm not sure whether it was compulsory or not, but it was very much, obviously a lot of people hadn't. So, and she also survived an outbreak of measles, which had killed some people in the area too. And there is an account of her going to Dublin and visiting various doctors. And really, I think the first mention of her being illness was going to Dr. Hudson in Dublin, who said she had congestion on her lung. And she was still being quite active right up until January of that year. She even went down to the farm they had in Galway and stayed there until February of that. And that looks like a very difficult journey. She describes how they made her a little feather bed on the train, and how she was met again in a covered wagon and brought out to the farm in Moynalty from Galway. And then there's no account of how she got back to Lakeview, but then
the image I had of her bath chair in Devon, the bath chair was sort of the long one with the wheel in front of it, where you'd recline looking out to sea.
Exactly.
Just before she passed.
And just to say, before she left, and I think this shows the loyalty of her staff, she left in early March to go to Hastings in this attempt to try and get better. Harriet's immediate family gathered, and these are some of her wonderful helpers, presumably in Westland, somebody called Malin. And actually in the interview that, Paul, you gave me with Ruby that Mr. Farrell made, she mentions the Malin family. So obviously the Malins were long-term, and he's mentioned a lot in the diaries. Malin and Biddy came to say goodbye, and then she departed on the long journey to the seaside city of Hastings, and she met up with her husband who was there. And then there's various descriptions of her moving to various guest houses until she got a more comfortable one on the seafront, and she was still receiving letters and still receiving, but then the diary ends rather abruptly. It was very sporadic really in the last few days. She obviously wasn't at all well.
Yes.
And as I say, she came back from Hastings, and 5 days later she died at Lakeview. Her brother William, and he is a very exceptional man, as I said before, he was with her when she died, and she's buried in the graveyard in Moynalty,
which you discovered,
which
and
thanks
located
again
in the last 2
yes.
or 3 days.
And sadly, in a way, the gravestone just says Hariette Mortimor, doesn't mention Barnes, which
Yes.
which would have helped, I think, in setting the scene in the history.
Well, thank you very much, Daphne, for coming along, and we wish you the best of luck in putting this together. It's a fascinating, it's a local story.
It is very
local. It's a
local.
fascinating story, and there's many things that can be explored. I'm sure. There's too many. I'm sure at this stage.
Yes.